This is the first Sunday in Epiphany. It's a whole new season that we're into now. And Epiphany is a time of learning and of renewal and of new thoughts and new ways of looking at something. And we always start Epiphany with the baptism of Jesus, whether we're looking at Matthew's, Mark's, Luke's, or even John's gospel. We all have similar stories and similar experiences of the baptism of Jesus. Now, what's really unique about baptism, it is the only the only thing we know for sure that was around during Jesus' day that we still do. Even when we look at the other sacrament of communion, all we've got is Maundy, Thursday, and Jesus was dead within 24 hours of that. So it's not something he even partook of. And certainly he can't do anything in memory of himself. So baptism is that thing that Christians share, that Jesus experienced too, and that the earliest church experienced. That puts it in a very special place, and it's a great place to start this new season of awareness and of wonder. And we have Jesus coming to John while John is teaching. Now, again, if you remember when we looked at John a few weeks ago back in Advent, he talks about the one coming, and I'm not good enough to untie the shoes. Now, John is very much versing a typical kind of patriarchal attitude where there's a hierarchy of who's good and who's not, of who's higher, who's lower, who's servant, who's master. And as we see throughout Jesus' ministry, Jesus completely upends that. There's nothing in Jesus' ministry that would suggest Jesus sees himself as superior. Maybe with a heavier task, but that doesn't make him superior. That just means he's got a heavier task. John, however, very much part of the world, saying, why are you coming to me? I should be going to you to be baptized. And Jesus says, no, it's got to be this way. So let's just do this so that the promise is fulfilled. Passing of the torch almost from the teaching that John was giving. Now let's back up a little bit to who John was and what community he was part of. He was probably an Essene, which is one of the sects of the first century Hebraic tradition. Essenes were primarily men, although the door is still open to see if any women were involved. They're mostly aesthetic, which means they lived very plainly, didn't have very much going on, and they were constantly doing bathing and ritual cleaning. Now, the Hebrew tradition did that too with the mikvahs and the rituals that they participated in before worship, but the Essenes did it every day. They saw cleaning as a way of washing away everything that they should identify as sin, get rid of anything in the way that is going to stand between them and their relationship with God. And we've inherited that in the baptism tradition. So many times over the centuries, baptism has been seen as a cleansing of sins, of washing away of all of that, of saving souls. That's why if you go to historic graveyards, you can see some graves of babies outside the gates and the fence of the graveyard. Children who died before they had an opportunity to be buried. There are a lot of traditions within the historic church that talk about who is allowed to baptize a child if they don't think they'll live long enough to be seen by a regular priest for the process. So midwives are given the opportunity. Parents are given the opportunity. Anybody can have the opportunity to baptize this child to make sure they are saved for heaven. So we get caught up in what baptism is all about. But in this gospel reading of Matthew, we've given a different image, a different suggestion of what it meant for the early church. It wasn't necessarily a cleansing of sins. I mean, a ritual cleansing is just part of so many cultures anyway, but that wasn't necessarily the focus. Jesus coming to the water to be baptized also was an opportunity to show Jesus part of the wider plan. Remember, we're in Matthew, so everything is related to the Hebraic tradition and how that moves forward. Jesus being baptized by John was kind of like a last step in the process of being recognized. We had the genealogies recognize him as being part of the house of David. We had dreams where Joseph not only grew to accept Jesus, recognizing how significant this was, but also saved Jesus' life when Herod wanted to kill him. We have magi coming from great distance to come and acknowledge that this is the child that everybody's been waiting for. We don't have anything about Mary, but I'm sure Mary had her experience in all of this, where she had to agree and accept who Jesus was. We have that through the Luke narrative for sure. We have all of these people acknowledging Jesus as the Messiah, as the special one, as the chosen one, the Christ. And now we have him going to the one who was baptizing in God's name, submitting himself. So again, the power dynamic is totally, it's not even subverted as so much as it's thrown out the window. It doesn't matter at this point. And then when Jesus comes up through the water, we have God finally confirming what everybody else who has been close to Jesus has basically known to be true. But now this is the final confirmation. This is my son. This is my anointed one, with whom I am very well pleased. This is the moment when Jesus' ministry will be started, when he is acknowledged publicly, semi-publicly, as the one who is sent. But more than that, this is the time when Jesus is acknowledged as the person, the named person, the being who is beloved by God. That's really what we reenact in baptism. It is not a cleansing of sins. There might be a component, but I mean, we do that when we wash hands. We do a ritual of washing things away. A little more than Lady Macbeth and what Pilate did as well. But it's a moment of cleansing, of washing. It's such a natural part of who we are, but it's not the only thing that is going on with Jesus being dunked in water. And one of these days, I really, really want to have a feminist sacramental scholar do the work on the origin of baptism and see how close it is to birth. Babies are born out of water. A sack of water has to explode for a baby to emerge. And I think there is something connected to this when we go through the ritual act of baptism, which is a very Christian ritual. This is not a ritual shared in other cultures. When we go through the act of baptism, it is a renewal. If you remember that exchange that Jesus gets into where he's misunderstood, I think it's Zacchaeus, but don't quote me on that. Could be Zachariah. Anyway, someone says, you mean I have to crawl inside my mother's belly and be born again? And Jesus says, no. You have to be born of the Spirit. Here we have a moment where we're watching Jesus being born of the Spirit, a true acknowledgement of what we experience in baptism. It's graphic in its beautiful images of the Spirit coming down like in the image of a dove, and it certainly speaks to various readings in the Hebrew Scripture, primarily Isaiah, that talk about the Spirit of God being visited on the Messiah. So there's your spiritual or your Scripture connection for Matthew, that all of this is fulfilling what was promised. But it's that very experience that we all share as well when we are baptized into the Christian church. It is a time when we are named publicly, where we are acknowledged and celebrated as new members of the church, essentially going through another birth process into another family, a wider community of the Christian family that is one family, universal, historic, going forward and backward. But it's this process of baptism where we join that time. And that's the significance of this, that ministry begins with this act of acknowledgement and this act of welcoming. Now from here, Jesus is going to go immediately to spending time in meditation and reflection in the desert and honestly, I wish more people coming to the church community would be acknowledged publicly and then go right off and spend that time rather than being bombarded with, can you do this committee and you can be that person, and where can I help and what can I do? Just taking that time after you are acknowledged to focus on what that relationship with God is going to be. At no point does Jesus flip the script back on John and say, okay, now I'm the guy, you have to submit to me. There's none of that going on. This is a relationship of equals, a relationship of respect, a relationship of acknowledging the importance, the significance of John the Baptist and his ministry and what that is going to mean. And it's a public statement that Jesus is now ready to take up this responsibility and keep on going. But at its very core, it is a statement about belonging. God acknowledging, this is my beloved Son. The same acknowledgement that we all receive at baptism, that we are perfect just the way we are. Who we are is perfect and beloved in God's eyes. There is nothing in us that needs to be changed to be accepting to God. We are just the way we're supposed to be the moment we approach God. Nothing in us needs to be different. And we have that experience of humility in Jesus that we can now bring into our own world, that we, as acknowledged beings, are welcomed fully into the family. No conditions, no setting ourselves lower, but allowing a humility of service to permeate everything that we do. Doesn't mean we are not equal to each other, because we are. But it means that we now grasp the concept of servant leadership, serving in a way that is Christ-like to each other. Baptism is our portal to do that. It's our portal to being part of something so much bigger. It's not merely an act of ritual to satisfy past generations. It's certainly not a washing away of all the bad stuff in us. It is an act of acceptance, an act of membership, and an act of welcome to the family. We've been waiting for you for a very long time. Everything about you is exactly who we need.